So this screencast is designed to give you an overview of some of the terminology relating to cardiovascular disease, and also just to give you a bit of a brief overview of how many people are affected by different types of cardiovascular disease. So we're talking about diseases of blood vessels, the vascular system. So coronary heart disease is about the blood vessels supplying the heart. Cerebrovascular disease supplying the brain, and peripheral arterial disease supplying the limbs, the arms and legs. You can have also rheumatic heart disease, which is damage to the muscles and the heart valves due to rheumatic fever, which thankfully doesn't happen that often. And then of course there are congenital heart disease, which are various birth defects or malformations of the heart structure. And these things often affect much younger people. Some of them are diagnosed even before children are born, and some of these are the causes of sudden death in younger adults. So I've given you the link there to CRY, which is an organisation that support people affected by cardiac disease in young people. Then we've got deep vein thrombosis, and pulmonary embolism, and these are about blood clots. In DVTs, they start in the legs, and what they do is dislodge, so the blood clots start moving around, and they tend to move to the heart and lungs, where they can cause heart attacks, but also in the lungs can cause pulmonary embolism. So that's a bit of blood vessel that is blocked in your lungs, and therefore that causes breathlessness and difficulty breathing. So there's a range of different things that all come under this vascular disease umbrella term. Some of the other terms you will have heard of: angina, which is pain due to the damage to the heart. So that might be chest pain, but it can also go up the neck and into the jaw, can also cause back and stomach pain, so it can be a little bit difficult to diagnose initially. Heart attack is the scientific word for that is a myocardial infarction, and that is caused by coronary heart disease, by that disease of the blood vessels, and what you have is a blood clot which blocks that coronary artery. So the heart's muscle becomes starved of blood and oxygen, and that causes pain. The hypoxia, the low oxygen levels, cause pain, but it also means that a part of the heart muscle can die because it's not getting the blood and oxygen. But that's just a part of the heart muscle. A cardiac arrest is when the heart stops beating altogether, it stops working. Heart failure, I will come back to in a minute, but that is the result of multiple heart attacks, so bits of heart muscle dying, and for some people one heart attack is enough and they die, they have a cardiac arrest and die. But for a lot of people, they have a number of cardiac arrests or heart attacks, and that causes the heart to be functioning much worse and therefore causing heart failure. And stroke is the other main area. So we're talking about a cerebrovascular accident, and that is poor blood flow to the brain, which causes a bit of cell death, and that can be due to lack of blood flow. If there's a blockage, there's an ischemic CVA, or it could be a bleed, so it's a hemorrhagic CVA. And just in case you have forgotten what the heart looks like or haven't come across this before, this diagram just gives you an overview of the structure of the heart, so you can get a better idea of which bits we're talking about when things go wrong. So people often think of heart attacks as a one-off event. What we need to remember is that heart attacks cause heart damage, and it can be this progressive level of disability as heart function deteriorates. So this classification just gives you an idea of the type of different levels of heart failure you might come across. So class 1, someone may have had an MI, a myocardial infarction, but actually it's not limiting their physical activity and they can go back to being physically active. no fatigue, no breathlessness or palpitations. Class 2 is a slight limitation of physical activity, so when people aren't doing anything, they're absolutely fine. But some ordinary physical activity can lead people to feeling fatigued, getting heart palpitations, getting breathless, or angina. So that is a symptom of mild heart failure. But you can see already that level of heart failure is having quite an impact on life. Class 3 is marked limitation of physical activity. So people may be comfortable at rest, but less than ordinary activity can lead to symptoms. So they may just be trying to go to the bathroom or something, and they're going to be symptomatic, they're going to get pain. But this also causes longer problems and more problems. And people tend to lose weight and tend to find it more difficult to eat because of breathlessness. So they're quite symptomatic with their illness. And class 4, people have any inability to carry out anything physically active because it all causes symptoms. So even at rest, they'll be struggling. They will have breathlessness. And this is where you might see somebody who needs nutritional support. Breathing is difficult. People feel exhausted. Eating becomes a tiring thing to do. And people will often have swollen ankles and legs because the heart is not pumping the blood around as it would normally do. So I've given you a link there to have a look a little bit more about any definitions of heart disease that you might wish to have. So what am I talking about with the current trends? So this module really is about non-communicable diseases. And actually, these are the main killers globally. So these are global trends. 7 out of 10 deaths are due to non-communicable diseases, so not infectious diseases. 17.9 million people affected by this in 2019, dying of that, which is 44% of deaths. So we tend to think of cancer as a big killer, and it is, but actually it's less than these non-communicable diseases. Ischemic heart disease is the top one, so that coronary arteries affected, and stroke is the second one. So this proportion is rising. We have got ischemic heart disease and stroke are slightly lower down in low-income countries because respiratory problems and infections and illnesses in neonates, in babies up to the age of 1, tend to be higher. But they're still very much a factor. This Global Hearts Initiative by the WHO is all about trying to strengthen our attempts to prevent and control cardiovascular disease. So that kind of gives you some understanding about, they were trying to work on things that cause cardiovascular disease, like smoking, for example, excess salt intake, obesity. So they're trying to work globally to decrease those things that make people more likely to have cardiovascular disease. And just because I think it's quite interesting, you might not, but the position of different countries for different diseases, this link talks about which countries have the biggest problems with coronary heart disease. So you just might be interested to know where we fit, the UK fits, or for any countries that you may have connections to, where do they fit as far as cardiovascular disease is concerned? So you just might want to have a look at that. What's really interesting as well, though, is that within a country there are massive differences due to social or wider determinants of health, which we've mentioned in a previous module. So it's going to be very different depending on which part of the country you live. So we have 1 in 4 deaths in the UK due to heart and circulatory diseases. So it's a very significant impact. And about 7.6 million people who are living with cardiovascular disease. So they have a diagnosis of cardiovascular disease but are living with it. That's about more than 1/10 of the population. Coronary heart disease is the biggest killer worldwide, and in the UK that's leading to over 100,000 hospital admissions each year. We have a lot of people who have survived a heart attack, and about 1.4 million people living post-heart attack, and we have about a million people living with heart failure, so that classification that I was talking about, but some level of disability in class 2, 3 and 4. So it's a major cause of disability in the UK, but strokes are the biggest cause of disability in the UK, and those of course can vary in severity too. For some people they will not survive a stroke, some people will have profound disability and be unconscious, never regain consciousness, and some people it's something that after a few months that they can work through and rehabilitate. So where does that fit in relation to cancer and other things, you might be wondering? And I've given you the link to this because I appreciate it's quite small to fit on one slide. But this is about UK deaths and what is causing all of the different deaths. And if you go onto this link, you can look at all the different, if you hover over them, the different parts come up and show you what all the figures mean. This was 2019, I think. No, 2020. 2020. So in 2020, we had 168,319 deaths due to heart and circulatory diseases. So it just gives you a really good understanding of how impactful these different conditions are. Cancer was slightly more on that particular year. But we've also got respiratory diseases and other things that were fitting in. And of course, we have dementia on there and Alzheimer's, some dementias are caused by vascular problems to the brain. So that the vascular aspect of that also is similar causes as with coronary heart disease. So hopefully it just gives you a bit of an overview of what's going on and why us working with people to try and decrease risks of cardiovascular disease is so important.